Well, hello, and welcome to Manifesting Monday. I have an invitation for all you highly sensitive empaths and conscious leaders and rebel breakers out there in the world. And what prompted me to do this was that I took some quiet time yesterday to watch a program on Netflix called The 12 Monkeys. And I found it fascinating because basically they were using quantum science and this time machine to literally splinter where their molecules sped up so fast that they were able to jump backwards and forwards in time. And the man who was actually called the primary or the witness, who was drawing visions, and there was another woman as well that she could see into the future and the past, and she was drawing all these visions down on paper, that this guy had fell in love with this woman, and she died of an embolism in her leg, and he went back about 600 or 700 times to try and save her, and every time he tried, nothing ever changed. And got me thinking about how often we spend so much time in the past regretting things that we did and wishing we could go back in time and change them, and how a lot of time when we're astral traveling or we're going into different planes and dimensions during our sleep time, this is really what we're doing is, we're going back to right the wrongs that we did and to change things, not only to help us live better lives now and heal from unresolved trauma from this lifetime, but also other lifetimes, perhaps where we were persecuted or killed or made wrong or cast out for being medicine women or shamans or healers in a time when it wasn't safe to actually be that energy. And we just have to look at how many lifetimes we actually do recall of being persecuted for our gifts. And what it also brought up for me watching how the effects of constantly jumping time we're having on the physical body is how often in this lifetime we actually are creating great resistance and great internal pressure in our bodies by suppressing our gifts and our talents and our abilities, and causing disease to show up in our body. And how often times this comes from unresolved childhood trauma, and not just the big traumas, but the chronic, unpredictable, toxic stresses of daily life, where as children it wasn't safe for us to express our feelings, or perhaps our parents, because they were still struggling to deal with their own stresses and the daily stresses of putting food on the table, weren't there, and there was emotional neglect. So I was thinking about this in regards to how we talk about fragmentation, or I often talk about child parts that basically your body is being run by the child parts that have been fragmented or dissociated in order to keep you safe when you were a child and perhaps didn't have what you needed from your primary caregivers, and how there's often multiple internal splinters or fragments, or what we call splits, that are happening inside of us that are causing us to have things like insomnia and anxiety and depression and chronic fatigue and some of these big autoimmune diseases and leaky guts and all sorts of ways that this can show up emotionally, mentally, physically in our bodies. And it's creating a lot of havoc. I know I certainly see that in my clinic every day, and I'm constantly working on my own stuff. And it affects every area of our life, as we know. One thing is how we do everything based on the attitudes and beliefs and programs and protective or defensive patterns that we've set up as children, and how we don't trust ourselves, because we're basically self-abandoning. These splinters are parts and pieces of ourselves. We're actually abandoning the very part of us that knows, that came in knowing that we are worthy, that we have value, that we deserve to have safety and belonging and connection. And emotional trauma, as you know, is all these hidden blocks that are going on inside our internal dialogue And remember, our body follows our mind. So it holds us back from even starting certain things, or growing or thriving in any relationships, or going on a date, or asking for a raise, or saying no more to a manipulative family member who doesn't want you to succeed, because deep down, it makes them feel bad about themselves. So, all these old protective patterns, we know they're designed to keep you safe. They're designed to keep things familiar and predictable, which are the habits that we put in place, that we would like to believe that we have some kind of control over what's happening in our life. But it also it's not very conducive to expanding our money flows, or creating a purposeful business, or taking that next up level in our private practice, or as an entrepreneur. That taking risks is part of being an entrepreneur, and we can't take risks that are aligned with our core visions and our values and what we're wanting to create in the world if we're coming from this place of playing small, because those child parts are keeping us safe. We also know cognitively that we have to take meaningful action towards living into our purpose, to claim our power. And yet this very thing that we want is always out of reach, because those childhood parts are keeping you from actually doing what you need to do. Even though intellectually as an adult, it doesn't make sense, and we self-sabotage all the time. And if you want to know the fastest way to dissolve these emotional blocks and traumas that are holding you back from whatever it is that you're asking for, a love relationship, or a purposeful business, or a full private practice, or more consistent revenue, then I invite you to join me for an upcoming webinar that I'm going to do called Childhood Disrupted: How to Not Scare Yourself Sick and Actually Get Where You Want to Go. And it's going to happen on Wednesday at 3 p.m. I'll be back in my home office then. So it's 3 p.m. South African time, 9 p.m. Eastern. And I'm going to give you some pragmatic tools that you can start to implement straight away, with the understanding of how you fragmented and how to call back and grow up your child parts, to really reparent yourself in a good way. And, I know life is busy. I know how easy it is to make excuses and to, say you don't have the time. And a mentor of mine once said to me, if you want to see where you're leaking time and you're leaking your energy out, just look at your web browser history. And it's really true that we spend a lot of time distracting ourselves in a way. This is not about blame, but it's about acknowledging that yes, you use busyness, or you use distraction as a way to not feel pain, or not feel uncomfortable, and embrace the growing pains, because it's so easy, isn't it, to stay stuck in that cycle of procrastination and indecision and perfectionism. And the more that we do that, the more we kind of isolate as well. And I know that's one of the things that I've certainly been asking for over the last 10 years is more co-creation, with conscious entrepreneurs that have the same core values as I do. Because isolation, when it's just you sitting behind your computer screen, can be a real killer of dreams. I mean, procrastination, they're all killers of dreams. But when you can just very lovingly and compassionately get curious about all these patterns that you put in place as a child to keep you safe, that you don't need anymore, then you don't have to stay stuck in avoidance of your purpose, of your healing, and of taking that next step, right? To start or grow your business or your private practice or whatever it is that you're calling in. And I love all the hearts. Thank you. Thank you for the private messages. Yes, I'm going to send you the details of that in a second. And if you want to get in on that webinar, I'm not letting technology stop me. I'm having some challenges learning a new system called Kartra and all the moving pieces. So, to keep it simple and make this easy for you to say yes to, I'm just going to send you a link. And if you want that, just PM me and I'll send that link for you to join me on Zoom for this webinar on Wednesday. So just for now, I want to just talk about the splintering, this fragmentation, or the way that we sort of split ourselves into parts and pieces of us. And it feels like you've got one foot on the brake and one foot on the accelerator, and you cannot believe how exhausted you are because you're spinning your wheels, and it doesn't matter what you are doing on the outside, it's not matching up with the inside. It's certainly been like that for me many, many times, and I often have new, old, childhood wounds raised to the surface. So the work is constant, and it's not always easy or comfortable, but it's so worth it in the end. So I just invite you to take some time today to look at, where are you splintering off like that 12 monkeys? Where are you holding yourself back by experiences or stories of the past? And which part of your identity is running your show right now? Versus who you're actually being, and what are those parts saying to you or not saying to you in your sort of daily interactions? I know without a doubt that the core splintering, the fragmentation, the split from the authentic you, the one that knows like it knows that you are valuable, that you're worthy of love, that you're worthy of acknowledgement, that you're worthy of receiving more money than you could ever spend in this lifetime. And I always say never enough, so you keep on creating, because that's really the joy of business. And where is it causing immense amounts of pain or shame or suffering or disease or any of the isms or the should-haves or the could-haves or the would-haves? Because not only does it have a negative impact on your life, right? It keeps you in that suffering state, but it also affects the ones you care most deeply about, which is why I'm an advocate of doing the shadow work, of getting really honest with yourself and creating mindfulness change. And any of you that have gone through that program with me, you know the power of it in 5 hours, just how much you actually start to realize and have compassion for yourself and start changing that at the level of your nervous system. And you also know that it can, I love you too. I got my phone on here. So thank you. Thank you, Craig. Yeah. So just know that you're already aware of it. Otherwise you wouldn't still be listening to me, but you know how often these habits, these deep programs, these deep tracks on your nervous system, they run deep. So they're very, very sinister in a way. They're very subtle and they're very nuanced, and they're blind spots for a reason, because when you're in it, you can't see it. And I spoke about this today on the weekly forecast, where we had 2 feathered animal guides show up and ostrich with this beautiful big neck that was saying this week, take your head out of the clouds. You need to get honest with yourself and look at what you're avoiding. And also to widen your perspective, to look at, sometimes we're so wide, we're so far out in the future that we don't actually actively appreciate or see how much abundance and resources we have right under our feet, right? We need to look down and take the visions out of the ethers, out of the heavens, and create heaven on earth. And how do you do that? Well, you start sharing your gifts. You start taking aligned action. You start being congruent in what you're speaking into the world. And that was the message from our animal guide in the north today of Parrot, of, where are you saying something but you don't believe it? Where are you just sort of repeating things out that you hear? And this is why mantras and affirmations don't work on their own, because you have to first heal from all this unresolved trauma, and you have to get really, yes, and yes, thank you. You have to get really honest with yourself about what is holding you back. So, if you're saying you're okay, or the sort of common response of I'm fine that we learn as children, because if we actually said we're not fine, we perhaps had already, based on past experience, realized that our parents were inept to give us the resources or the safety or the reassurance to really feel those emotions inside. So when we're saying I'm fine, over time, that's just one of the ways. If you had a disrupted childhood where perhaps you were growing your parents up because there was no emotional safety, the rage and the resentment, it builds and it builds and it builds in our body. This is what depression is. It's deep we're repressing how we're really feeling. And over time, eventually the body says no. And I don't want you to have to get to that point. I want you to be able to know that the good news is that you created the beliefs, the attitudes, the protective patterns in the first place. Nobody else did it, right? And your life and the way that it's mirroring back to you is a reflection of where you are at in those patterns. And if you sort of feel like you're about to explode into a million tiny pieces, then, let's change that for you now. Because in that moment, for whatever reason, whether it's fear of conflict, whether it's unspoken family rules or cultural baggage, or, fear of being judged, or fear of being abandoned, which is really underneath all the fears, then all of that says it's not okay to be angry, or whatever other million things it could be, right? Through the filters of your belief systems and your attitudes and these protective patterns, we learn to say, I'm fine. We learn to start self-abandoning and rejecting the part of us that's screaming for attention. And often the scream is in body pain, or it's in mental anguish, right? It's in anxiety or depression or numbness, or just feeling unfulfilled, feeling hypercritical of yourself, not being able to see the joy in the world. So, for many of the people that I work with, those sort of subtle examples, they actually run their whole life, and they never, ever, okay, somebody's calling me. So, they never, gosh, that's what you call a pattern interrupt. Let me just turn that off. All right, let me just bring that back in because the energy is running so fast. So just remember that these sort of seemingly little things, these coping strategies that may start as little white lies to yourself, they build up and they build up and they build up, especially if they're not being expressed in a healthy way. They become pathological. And this is autoimmunity, where our cells, our nervous system, our immune system literally turns on itself, right? That it's the ultimate form of self-rejection, of self-abandonment. And I don't want you to get to that point before you actually say yes to looking at a different way of being with yourself and bringing those parts and pieces back into wholeness, right? Wholeness is just healing. It's about not abandoning ourselves. It's about reparenting yourself in a loving way. And I think that a lot of the teachings that we all learn, in the mystery schools about love and acceptance and kindness, they're all great, but we have to look at the shadows, right? We have to look at the shadow parts and the contrast of what we're experiencing, because we can't know love unless we've known unlove. We can't know love unless we've known hate. We can't know trust unless we've been betrayed. This is how we evolve and learn. But we don't need to stay in the pain pathways longer than we need to. We just need to receive the lesson, identify it, thank our body for the feedback, and then integrate it and restore it so that we can rewrite our old stories. And again, this is about being really aware of who you're calling into your life to support you. I had a conversation with somebody yesterday that was feeling like really anxious because the woman that she was seeing for her treatments is leaving. She's not going to be doing the work anymore. And I think that we need to be very aware of where we can very easily become codependent rather than interdependent. And that, there are a lot of false prophets out there that are violating their students. They're being aggressive and manipulative and downright abusive. And I certainly left a so-called consciousness cult that, I brought into 5 African countries. I opened it up for them. I taught a lot of people how to run the certain process. And, I'm really, really sorry. And I made a public apology about that. And that's not what this is about. But all I want to just say is, in splintering and in fragmentation, yes, we're all doing our work. But we also need to be walking our talk. And again, this came back to parrot medicine and also the medicine from Nightingale, who was the other animal totem that showed up for this week, to say that even if we're walking in the valley of death, even if we're walking in the shadows, even if we're in the dark and we can't see it, we still need to have that internal congruence that is in integrity. We have to be claiming our identity that's based on our core values of what we want to create as acts of service. And lies, manipulation, violation, betrayal, deceit, you name it, regret, shame, blame, they're all distractor implants. Jealousy is another one. And they're all hidden a lot of time behind this sort of new age spiritual movement, behind spiritual identities that have become very entangled and woven around them. Some of these have been going on in religions for, in cults and churches and secret societies and societies of secrets for decades, for centuries. And I know these are extremely difficult examples, but they're all born from this core of internal fragmentation, of internal splitting, of a break away from being heart-based, right? And this is the new currency, is based in love. It's based on service first. And that is the new wealth frequency and the codes that we are bringing in. And, this isn't to say that we aren't going to make mistakes and fall down, but it's in how we get up, and it's in how we reset our internal compass to follow our internal guidance and our truth and our intuition. So this is turning into a long one, but just know that inside of everything that I do in the Access Your True Nature portal, when you say yes, you're saying yes to you. You're trusting yourself first, to trust in the resources and in me as a fierce medicine guide, to be by your side, not as a leader, but as gentle, loving support that is by you and that's going to call you on your crap. So if you're willing to say yes to receiving, again, a huge message for this week from the Energy Spiritual Forecast from Animals, then I invite you to join me in this upcoming webinar where you're going to get a really good taste of how I work with cutting edge science and intuition and a little woo in trauma resolution and strategies, where you're going to have actionable nervous system hacks that you can start implementing and using right away. And you're the one that does the work. I can't do the work for you, but you're going to identify and reintegrate and dissolve and resolve live with me on this webinar. All these hidden emotional traumas that may be holding you back, so that you can actually start to get the results and the love and the money and the connection that you've been asking for and you just didn't know quite how to get there. So I'm also going to teach you how to heal from your wounded child parts, especially if your childhood was disrupted. And most of us, trauma brings us together, and we're all being traumatized through relationship. But this is also how we heal from trauma, is through relationship. So if your childhood was disrupted, if your biology is making you sick now, this is your opportunity to start to look at how you can reparent yourself, how you can start to grow yourself up and heal some of these emotional wounds of neglect, or feeling like you had to be the parent to your parent, or that you were the one that had to be the fixer, that you were the one that's the good girl, whatever your archetype is or your attachment style of wounding, your coping mechanisms, how you show up. We're going to have a good hard look at that. And if you're wondering, if this is relevant to you, or maybe someone that might need to receive this and is ready for it, and you want to share this video with them, please do. Because if you're here, you're an empath. You probably have felt like you carry the responsibility of others or the burden of the world on your shoulders, and you're feeling overwhelmed or unfulfilled, or like many of my clients that are big children, right, are adults. They have great degrees, they have good jobs, they're making great money, but they're still living in one of the most beautiful, tender corners of the world, because there's sadness there. There's something that just feels a little bit off, they can't put their fingers on. And it's coming from this little child inside of you, multiple child parts in front of you and inside of you that are afraid, that need you to tell them that you've got them now, that they're safe, and that they can come home back to you, to the heart of who you are in your authentic self. So if you can identify, with being a little lost girl or a little lost boy, little boy blue, and you feel like if you didn't actually get a chance to be a child in your childhood, and you're currently struggling with this on a day-to-day basis. I just was a speaker on my friend Tony Black's summit called the Inner Child Summit, and it's still going on. So a lot of people inside of that group said they don't know how to play. They can't remember when they last felt deeply happy. The idea of playing terrifies them, because those parts have been frozen and numbed out and dissociated for so long because they had to grow themselves up as parents. So I'll be sharing more about what a parentified child is. If you feel like you were robbed of your childhood, I'm going to show you what that could look like and the impacts that I believe that this does have. And more importantly, what you can do about it as the safe, loving, compassionate, patient adult that you are now. So if you've attended one of my webinars or workshops, or you've already invested in the Out of the Blues program that's available in my store, or you've done the mindfulness change process with me, you know already, that having a trauma and attachment informed practice that's efficient and integrated and holistic and evidence-based and pragmatic, that is easy for you to start implementing in your life, then join me. Because I always love doing these live webinars, because it's always come from a place of love. They're very non-judgmental, virtual, like a healing room, where everyone from all walks of life are welcomed, and where you get your answers to some of the questions that you might have swimming around or ruminating in your head and causing you to have sleepless nights. And of course, I learn through your insight and through your questions and through your vulnerability. So it's always greatly appreciated and welcome. So if you have symptoms, like some of the ones that I've just spoken to, like you feel like you're protecting a life you're not living, that you're not making the amount of money that would make you feel like you have the safety and the security to stretch to your next growth edges, or you're tired of calling in abusive or narcissistic people into your love life, or you feel like you're tired of being alone and isolated, but you're afraid to let anybody get too close. And that's part of a disorganized attachment, or, come here, go away, that I know very, very well, that it's really hard to trust anybody if you didn't have that in your childhood. And it does show up like anxiety, like isolation, like depression and procrastination and perfectionism, or maybe where you're just too scared to use your voice. And both those birds in the energy forecast for the week are saying, sing your song. If not for anyone else, do it for yourself. Do it for those that you love. Sing your love song into the world. Sing your sadness into the world and your grief, so that you can start to feel it, and then you can start to heal it. Start occupying the space that's available to you, that's far greater than your physical body. And even if, yes, intellectually I'm making sense, but you're kind of still not doing it, just know all those things are signs of fragmentation, of dissociation, and potentially emotional trauma that's not just blocking you, but that's going to make you sick at some point in your life. So, I'd love to personally help you to turn your nervous system into your greatest ally this Wednesday. So I hope that you kind of just take some time out of your schedule. Just book it out. Put me time in your diary. 3 p.m. South African time, 9 p.m. Eastern. I'm trying to do it so that I can work with all my beautiful tribe that are scattered all across the world. And just know that, wherever you find yourself right now, you're not alone. I really invite you to get curious, whether you join me or not, whether you feel like you've got it handled and you're going to do it on your own. I'm celebrating and cheering you on. That, please just tread gently on yourself. Take a note out of Bear Medicine, who ended in our direction of the West in the weekly forecast, to, once you've downloaded all this information, and it does take a lot of energy to do that, a lot of mental power, give yourself a break, take an Epsom salt bath, have a nap, go into a little bit of hibernation so that your body can heal during sleep, during rest time. And just know that as you start to begin to uncover how you've splintered or split or fragmented or dissociated in various timelines on your life, you really need to call in a blanket of soft, loving, non-judgmental, compassionate space for yourself, or let me hold that for you, because we're not designed to do this on our own. This is about coming back to the heart of what it means to be a human being, and to have eyes on you, kind eyes, and a place of safety where you can rest, because your tribe's got you. So I'd love to know, what arises for you during your own self-exploration this week. I'd love to hear what that looks like for you. And if any of this resonated with you, I'd love to know which parts resonated with you, what you'd like me to speak more to on that webinar on Wednesday. And if you know anyone that might be looking for something like this, please like it, share it, follow me so that you get notified when I go live on Facebook in my various groups or on my business pages. And in case nobody told you today, I see you, I love you, and I honor you. So keep shining your light, and remember, the world needs you and what only you have. So keep going, and I hope to see you in that webinar on that training of childhood disrupted and how to grow your child parts up in a loving, compassionate way. Thank you for the hearts, for the love. Great to see you here, everyone. Thank you, Caroline and Mary and Kate and everyone else that might be watching this on the replay. And wherever you find yourself, make this week count, and be gentle with yourself. Serena, I'd love to send that to you. Great. All right. Send me a DM, and I'd love to explore that more with you. And gosh, I just feel so blessed and honored that you take time out of your busy time to be with me on these musings and daily doses of body, mind, medicine. As always, I'm here to serve you and support you any way that I can, and just to keep you also remembering, that faith and action comes from believing in yourself. And if you were never shown and acknowledged that you are amazing, it's really hard to believe and trust yourself. I know that. My biggest lesson in life is to learn how to deepen into trusting my own innate body wisdom, trusting my intuitive process, and just allowing my whole self to come online. This is why it's called mastery, because that's our path, in this crazy, beautiful world that we live in called being human. And part of that is just to remember, what if your only purpose is to play more? Because when we play and we let go of all these constructs, we actually are in the best creative space of the imagination that we possibly can be. And now I'm just rambling, so I'm going to love you and leave you, and I hope to see you soon. All right, much love. Bye.